911 emergency. Okay, what's going on?
I don't know. He was shot.
He was shot?
I don't know.
At Toys R Us?
I don't know.
Okay, what's going on there? Who's there with you?
You have the staff right on the staff room. We had a manager jumping at 4 o'clock. We were unloading stuff.
Okay, is he alive?
I don't know if he's alive.
When most people go to work, they expect to return home at the end of the day, safe and sound. But for Larry Wells, a routine shift quickly turned into a nightmare. 35-year-old Larry Wells was an assistant manager at Toys R Us, a job he adored. Anyone who knew Larry would tell you that he loved toys and games, which made this job all the more likable to him. As a father of a 4-year-old daughter and a pregnant wife at home, with another child on the way, it only made sense that Larry would spend quite a bit of his time working. After all, he had a family to provide for and was certainly good at it. Little did he know, his life was about to take a tragic turn. On June 29, 2013, at 5:47 a.m., a 911 call was made by a distraught woman from a Toys R Us store. In the frantic call, she urgently requested help, but seemed uncertain about the details, mentioning that someone might have been shot.
Okay, what's going on?
I don't know. He was shot.
He was shot?
I don't know.
At Toys R Us?
I don't know.
Local officers were quickly dispatched to the scene, preparing for a possible active shooter situation. Upon arrival, officers saw several staff members gathered together. One of them said, "It's Larry. He was shot. He's in the office upstairs." Unsure if the gunman was still in the building, the police cautiously entered, prepared for the possibility of an ambush. When they reached the office, they immediately spotted Larry slumped over in his chair. Detecting a faint pulse, the officers quickly dragged him out of the building, hoping to save his life. Once Larry was in the ambulance, it was discovered that he hadn't been shot, but stabbed. While local officers rushed Larry to the hospital, the SWAT team was called in to secure the Toys R Us. They swept through the entire building, but the attacker was already gone. With the area cleared, the focus shifted to securing the crime scene and figuring out who could have done this to Larry, a genuinely good guy who seemed to get along with everyone. Tragically, the stab wound to Larry's chest was so severe that it claimed his life. After his passing, local officers had the heartbreaking duty of informing his wife, Jill. Devastated by the sudden and brutal loss of her husband, Jill struggled to comprehend how anyone could want to harm the man she had loved since high school. Overwhelmed with grief, she also began to fear for her own safety and that of their young daughter. Larry's death made it clear to the police. They weren't just searching for an attacker, they were hunting a murderer. Law enforcement swiftly began documenting the crime scene, capturing chilling images of the bloodstains scattered throughout the upstairs office. Larry's chair was soaked with blood, which had pooled on the floor and even splattered across the walls. The phone in the room hung off the hook, emitting a piercing, relentless tone, a haunting reminder of the violence that had unfolded. As officers processed the crime scene, they didn't find a weapon, but they did discover a 2007 Florida Gators championship hat on the floor near Larry's chair. The hat, a goldish tan and black, seemed out of place. The officers photographed the hat and bagged it for evidence, intending to analyze the DNA on its brim. The next step was to interview the employees who worked with Larry at Toys R Us. The detective began with the employee who had made the frantic 911 call. She recounted that Larry had arrived for an early inventory shift around 4 a.m. As usual, he and his co-workers had locked the doors behind them to ensure their safety while stocking the shelves. But by 5 a.m., she noticed something alarming. The front door was slightly open. Feeling that something was wrong, she went to look for Larry. When she found him, he was bleeding profusely. Panicked, she immediately dialed 911, desperately hoping to save his life. The detective continued by interviewing the other 4 employees who had been present during the crime. Their stories all aligned. and none of them showed any signs of involvement in Larry's murder. While this consistency left the detective momentarily puzzled, one crucial detail stood out. Toys R Us was equipped with an extensive surveillance system. In Larry's office, the police found the DVR pulled away from the wall with its wires cut. Detectives realized this meant they might not be able to see everything that happened, but they were determined to gather as much footage from the surveillance cameras as possible. Surveillance footage revealed that Larry arrived at the store around 3:50 a.m. that morning. At 4:08 a.m., the cameras captured him leaving the stockroom and heading toward the front door. By 4:30 a.m., the footage shows Larry escorting the truck driver, who delivers inventory to Toys R Us, out through the back door. As detectives reviewed the footage, they noticed something unusual. At around 4:24 a.m., a door near the Babies R Us section opened. Going back further, they spotted a pair of legs passing by the door. The figure, dressed in dark clothing, stood by the store's entrance for a few minutes before the doors opened, allowing the person to enter the building and quickly disappear from the camera's view. The next step was to identify this person and uncover their motive for harming Larry. Detectives continued scouring the surveillance footage, tracking the mysterious figure throughout the store. On the next camera, they spotted the individual on the Toys R Us side, moving stealthily through the aisles and using the shelves to avoid detection by the cameras. This behavior led detectives to believe the person was familiar with the store's layout. In another camera's footage, the figure was seen walking through the electronics department. Here, it became clear that the individual was holding what appeared to be a large knife and was wearing the same Florida Gators hat found on the office floor where Larry's murder took place. Shortly afterward, the person entered the office, lying in wait for Larry. Unfortunately, there was no surveillance footage inside the office to capture what transpired between him and the suspect. By 4:39, the cameras had stopped recording, likely because the suspect had unplugged the DVR from the outlet. Detectives, suspecting that the DVR cord had been handled by the perpetrator, carefully removed it from the crime scene and sent it for DNA testing, hoping to identify who was responsible for what happened to Larry. Soon, the detectives discovered that the DNA from the DVR cord matched that found on the Florida Gators hat. However, the DNA was not in the system, indicating that the suspect had no prior arrests. This was frustrating for the detectives, but they continued working tirelessly to identify the person behind the hat and scarf. Hamburg police enlisted the help of the FBI to develop a profile of the suspect. They wanted to understand who would commit such a crime and why, particularly since the suspect had no prior criminal record. With the FBI's profile in hand, the police began investigating several individuals, hoping to identify the person responsible for Larry's murder. Unfortunately, none of these leads proved fruitful, as the DNA didn't match. After months without progress, the detectives felt discouraged and decided it was time to request DNA samples from the employees working that night. This step aimed to rule them out as suspects and narrow the search for the killer. While most employees complied quickly, one worker, Bernard Grutze, repeatedly made excuses to avoid providing his DNA. Bernard, who worked as a loss prevention manager, knew Larry personally and had even been the one to show detectives the store's surveillance footage. Detectives reached out to him multiple times, but he always had an excuse, whether it was taking his child to a soccer game or going to the doctor. Although Bernie Grutze appeared to be cooperating by showing the officers the surveillance footage, his failure to provide a DNA sample raised some concerns. At one point, he claimed to be away at a conference and unable to provide his DNA. But detectives quickly found this to be false. They contacted the Toys R Us headquarters and learned from his boss that no such conference had occurred. Determined to speak with Bernie, the detectives eventually tracked him down at his father's home. When officers arrived at Bernie's home, He readily provided a DNA sample, which was quickly sent to the lab for analysis. To their shock, the results revealed that Bernie's DNA matched both the hat and the DVR cord connected to the crime. Detectives arranged an interview with Bernie, now the prime suspect. During the interrogation, they showed him images from the CCTV footage and the hat found at the crime scene to observe his reaction. Bernie insisted he had never seen the hat before. As the interview continued, a detective informed him that his DNA was also found on the DVR cord. Bernie dismissed this by saying he often works with such equipment and would naturally come into contact with it. Unperturbed, the detectives pressed further, asking, "If you've never seen the Florida Gators hat before, how do you explain your DNA being found on it?" Bernie appeared confused and insisted that it made no sense, claiming he hadn't harmed Larry. The detectives, however, remained skeptical and continued to press him for more details. Bernie argued that he was familiar with the cameras and the system, suggesting he wouldn't be foolish enough to commit a crime while being recorded. He also inquired whether he needed a lawyer. At this point, Bernie stopped cooperating and requested legal representation, forcing the detectives to end their interrogation. But the investigation didn't stop there. The detectives executed search warrants at Bernie's home, his father's residence, and his girlfriend's property, hoping to uncover evidence that would link him to the crime.
October 16th, we're heading over to Bernie's house regarding the Royce Rush homicide. Tom Brown and Scott Casino will be doing an interview. Bert! What's up, bro? How you doing? Hey, sleeping. We're still talking about you, man. These are the two photos that I wanted to show you. Just to see if anything sticks out to you. I mean, you can see the guys wearing the hat. Right. You never see any employees or anybody in the store? Nothing like that. DVR, the contract part, all the pulled on, those things we watch the video. Right, like a power port. Right, yeah. You know, DNA was found on the hat of the power port? Right. Well, let's try it. Let's work with it. There's one other issue, and it's a major issue. Okay. You never saw the hat, you don't know who's in that video, but how was your DNA on that hat? There's DNA on the hat? I have no idea. The only thing I can think of is the fact that I saw it. It makes no sense. This is your opportunity. I didn't do it. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say. I'm not going to say I did it when I didn't do it. You made a mistake that morning. Don't make another one today. Whatever, guys. You say Bernie. Great. I didn't do it. Because the only way you got I don't know how it could be because you were hanging on when you won't. As bad as whatever you guys have looks or whatever, I didn't do it. I know the camera. I know the system. If I did this, it'll lay. I would have left all this evidence. So, where do we go from here? I don't know. What can I do? I don't want you talking. I didn't do that. I'm done. I'm not talking anymore. I want a lawyer. I'm done.
While searching Bernie's house, the detectives found several items from Toys R Us in his garage. He had games, electronic devices, and other high-priced items stored away. They also discovered an SD card. They viewed various files on the SD card and eventually came across a file of him at his house coming in with those black sweatpants on. The sweatpants had the same writing on them that the suspect was seen wearing. By now, detectives knew that Bernie was the one who killed Larry. They continued to dig deeper into his background and discovered that he was stealing from the company and would often sell items on eBay that he'd taken from the store. It was clear that Bernie had a problem and was using his role in loss prevention to cover up the inventory-related crimes he was committing. Bernard Grucha was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, to which he pled guilty. He has since been sentenced to 25 years in prison. Apparently, Bernie planned to steal money from the office and was caught in the act, so he stabbed Larry in the chest. The tragic reality of this situation is that Bernie knew Larry well. Larry even considered him a friend. In a cruel twist, Bernie not only took the life of a hardworking and dedicated man, but also ripped away a devoted father who cherished his family deeply.